Okay, so this is the last session of the day, and I realize that we've all had a very long morning without a break, and an afternoon which has been also equally as long, but equally as exciting. I'm particularly humbled to appear now after a number of esteemed speakers, Dr. Steikert, Wolfgang Teinwächter, and Veni, and Leonid Todorov, for the reason that I was throughout my life on the other side of what used to be the Iron Curtain. And having seen the history advance as it has in the past 20, 30 years and how things have changed so much, I remember the early days being able to email Russia in the early 90s, the days of kremvax.demos.su, and it felt a little bit for us like speaking to the forbidden fruit, like breaking the law, not on our side as well as the people who were on the other side. And it was just very pioneering, and I think we are seeing history advance in the way that it is going. If you want to know more about early internet history, I think that most of the efforts of the people who have spoken before me in this room are actually in the NSRC, Network Startup Resource Center, nsrc.org connectivity database, which has, in fact, an email from Dr. Steikert on early internet in Romania as it was developing. So we've got all of the information available out there. But I just wish that someone picked up a pen and wrote an actual book of all of the history of the individuals that made the internet that it is today, because we see that there are many, many different individual achievements. And that's how the net was built. Anyway, my short presentation, I hope, here is about the Internet and the World Conference of on International Telecommunications, the WCIT for some, WCIT for others. It's one of these subjects which you're going to hear about a lot more as the time approaches. And so I just thought I'd shed a little bit of light of what it is and how it works and what really are the problems at stake at the moment. So I had this slide yesterday, just giving a quick background on the internet. Wolfgang did an excellent job in providing us with detailed information, so I'll skip through this one. You're happy that we're one slide closer to the end. Multi-stakeholder, big word, a word that has been used throughout this meeting. I have a question actually, because we speak about multi-stakeholder in English, but is the word multi-stakeholder translated in Romanian, for example? What's the word for multi-stakeholder in Romanian?
It's translated by sentence.
By sentence, it's translated by sentence. So there's no actual word for multi-stakeholder. Now, what about in Bulgarian, Veni?
Not sure, actually.
And this is the thing, I thought about this as well in French, and we're not faring any better. In French we have multi-acteurs, which sounds more like a film than reality. And we have multi-partit, which is multi-party, which sounds very political. So we're not doing well at all, and this is, I think, one of the problems that the multi-stakeholder description is very hard to explain to people, because you have to use a sentence to say what multi-stakeholder is. So when you look at the multi-stakeholder system, you always have to go through the whole slide: governments, businesses, civil society, technical community, the whole thing. But in English, it's a lot easier to understand it. I showed this diagram yesterday, the internet model. This is really what the internet was built on in order to bring the innovation that we saw in such a short amount of time. You could plug in any computer, anything online, and it would actually be successful. It would actually work, rather than the system before, where you had to get a license, and remembering the days of the telecommunication monopolies in Western Europe. You could not buy a phone in Germany and bring it into France and plug it in there. You needed to actually have it licensed, although it might have been the same manufacturer. But it was all very complex indeed, and very top-down. The multi-stakeholder standards, I spoke about them yesterday. There seems to be a complete ecosystem that built itself up from scratch. And so the World Wide Web Consortium, the IETF, the IAB, all of these organizations built themselves from scratch by people who had an idea and followed it. The RFCs, which are the request for comments, which are really the internet standards, started with RFC number 1. Now the IETF is dealing with it, but RFC number 1 was Steve Crocker, who thought, well, hang on, we're starting to write documents about what we're doing. Maybe we should start, putting numbers on them so we don't lose them, because it looks like we have more and more paperwork that's going to be generated. And when RFC number 1 was drafted by Steve Crocker, I had a chat with him recently. I think he never thought it was going to go to the thousands and thousands of RFCs that would have come out. And it was called RFC because it was really a request for a comment. Hey, I've got an idea. If we do this, what do you think we can do out of that? And I'm welcome to having comments from you. Multi-stakeholder policy, again, dialogue all around. Everyone speaks to everyone. Governments and multilateral institutions. The Internet Society has been very, very active, and we know Veni here has been very active with his chapter in bringing the Internet and educating people about the Internet. Initially, the Internet Society was educating people about the Internet. No one knew what it was. And now, of course, the mission has changed a little bit to the defense of the Internet model. The IGF, which started out very small and has grown ever since and seems to be this extraordinary forum where everybody can come to the table and prepare workshops and discuss matters, is another one of these incredible things. The ICANN multi-stakeholder model, which I spoke about yesterday. Again, a lot of this is all bottom-up, and originally many of the subgroups, the supporting organizations and so on, were all grouped sometimes together, sometimes they were independent, but they all ended up under the same umbrella of ICANN and working together to make the Internet what it is today and to make sure that the Internet does not collapse. Because really, the ICANN, the first function of ICANN was to make sure that there was a coordination of domain names and addresses that would basically not, that would work. And so the Internet would not collapse in any way, especially when you think that it has grown and grown for so many years. So, now let's talk about the ITU. I think we know a lot about ICANN and the Internet and so on, and who are the ITU? So, the ITU are an international the International Telecommunications Union. They were created in 1865, so that kind of predates the Internet by quite a few years. It predates most of the other organizations that I've just spoken about by quite a few years. And so you could think that they have a lot more legitimacy than any of the other organizations, which are the new kids on the block. The ITU should know what it's talking about. I mean, 1865. They started out as the International Telegraph Union, and one of the main things that they had to do at the time was to deal with billing, because you had a lot of different telegraph and telephone companies out there. When they started having international communications, they needed to find a way to find out who was going to pay for what. And rather than having to have separate contracts and separate contracts for each one of the countries that they were going to be connected with. And let's remember, most of the telegraph and telephone was run by the countries themselves, the governments themselves investing into the infrastructure. When these were to talk to each other, they thought, well, let's have a union under which we can actually all subscribe to this, we can all become members, and then we will be able to deal with billing agreements, etc. And then after that, it grew into an organization that started building standards. And some standards are very well known. All of the X25 standards of the late 80s, or the mid 80s actually, the V21 modem standards. These were modem speeds, modem protocols, where we're using these little boxes that made noises when they started connecting, and sometimes did not connect, and you would just think like throwing them out of the window. These were all standards that were from the ITU. And what you had at the time were a lot of telecommunication companies and countries coming around a table, having their regular meetings, producing huge stacks of paperwork, colored paperwork. There were yellow ones and green ones and blue ones and white ones and so on. And each country and each telecommunication company would actually bring their line to the document so that they could say they were part of this as well. I'm a little biased. At the time it was called Comité Consultatif International de Téléphonie et Télégraphie, CCITT, which they then changed to ITU or UIT in French, Union Internationale de Télécommunications. It was easier to refer to that than to the larger term. But all of these standards and all of these regulations worked very well until the late 80s. Because in the late 80s, the internet started, Internet Protocol, which was not based on X25, not based on any of the work that was done there, started rising. And of course, you ended up with a battle, didn't you? With the American standards being the internet, and the non-American standard, the international standard, being the X25 standard, which was primarily Europe-based. And I remember even in England, England was firmly behind continuing to push for X25 and X400 email. I don't know if any of you have used X400 email ever. It's a nightmare. You have to tell, to put in a line with all sorts of backslash, forward slash, equals, and codes, what your telecommunication carrier is, what the country is, what your public PRMD, they're things which you just can't get. And if you didn't get it right, you would just get a bounce and say, sorry, it doesn't work. Not helpful at all. Very, very frustrating. And the billing was really terrible because you could get the address right, and then it would bounce back and say, sorry, it doesn't recognize the address. Actually, the address is correct, but your supplier did not have a commercial agreement with the other supplier for sending those, 25K of emails. Just one line. It didn't have this agreement, so it would just bounce it back and say, sorry, we can't carry it. It doesn't work. Anyway, the ITU structure is actually quite complex. It's a large organization. It's got the ITU-R, which deals with all the radio communications, because they're in charge of that radio spectrum, all of the mobile spectrum, all of that on one side. The ITU-T, that deals with telecommunications standardization. And in there you've got the WTSA and the Telecommunications Standardization Advisory Group and various study groups as well under that. And then the ITU-D, which deals with the telecommunication development. And in there you've got Telecommunication Development Advisory Group, which is also pretty active. Overall, it's got plenipotentiary conferences that happens every number of years. I don't know exactly, is it 4 years or 6 years? The last one was in Mexico. It lasted 3 weeks. Of course, there's a lot of things to discuss, but 3 weeks is, you really need to be full-time in this. And of course, the people that take part in the ITU are full-time telecommunication and government people who work in this circle. So there's no need to have volunteers and businesses that have to earn money out of that. No requirement. So you can really have very long conferences. And then of course there's the WCIT, the World Conference on International Telecommunications, which deals with the international telecommunication regulations, the ITRs, the things we've all been speaking about for the past 2 days. So the ITU is also divided in regions. So in addition to the ITU, then you've got the different regions, which are different, a little bit different to the ICANN regions, for example, where you just look at continents. Here you have the CEPT, which is for Europe, and that's 48 countries. The APT, the Asia Pacific Telecommunity, that's 38 countries. The ATU, which deals primarily with African Telecommunication Union. CITEL, which is the Inter-American Telecommunications Commission. So that really, CITEL is dealing mostly with the all of the OAS members. So you're dealing with Central Latin America, primarily, and then the Arab states, those are a separate group, and then the RCC, and that's the Regional Commonwealth in the field of communications, and that's the former Soviet republics. So the former Soviet republics are separate from the CEPT. It's a different group altogether. The ITRs themselves, the regulations themselves, are actually a 1988 treaty. And as I said earlier, because there was this war already going on between the American IP internet thing and what was going on in ITU and the X25 standards, none of the ITRs of the time dealt with the internet at all. They thought that the internet was a fad. I was just reminded of a saying earlier, the internet is like skateboard. It works now, lots of people want to use it, but one day it will just fade away because nobody, it's just one of these things. So in 1988, they established a treaty for general principles for the provision and commercial of international communication. And primarily there were three things: the interconnection and interoperability part of it, to make sure that it works worldwide. The telecommunication worked worldwide. The underpinning of efficient operation of technical facilities, so it was going to be a structured network. And in fact, the X25 and all of the networking protocols which were designed at the time were a lot more structured than the internet protocol. You would have various levels of priorities that you could use. You would have billing that was integrated because you needed to bill on a per packet basis, the amount of information you sent. So you needed to be able to track all of this. So all of that was going to be included in the regulations. And then of course the efficiency and availability of international telecommunication services, saying, we need to make sure this is going to be able to work worldwide. And of course, telecommunication services at the time were primarily just telephony and the budding parts of this X25 network, which only came to, I would say, 20 countries or so at the time. Not that many were around. Maybe 30, I'm not sure. I'm just doing this from memory, but this was a sort of number of countries that were connected. So why is the WCIT so controversial? Well, it's something we've touched on during the whole week. And the main problem, I guess the first, I think it's article number 2, changing the term of telecommunications, which is what it used to do, with the term of information and communication technology, ICTs. ICTs is a term that the UN has used throughout the Internet Governance Forum to describe the whole, internet and communication space, anything that goes from your laptop to your mobile phone, and anything that basically is electronic and that you can access a network and access information with. And so this really becomes a problem, because you start thinking, well, hang on, does this mean that the internet is explicitly included in the ICT term? So in order to kind of have a clearer view on this, let me take you over to this is a technical diagram. I know some of you, it's late and technical stuff might not be what you wish to look at right now, but it actually helps a lot in understanding what is meant by ICT, what is meant by telecommunications. If you look at the model here, this is a stack. This is the Open Systems Interconnection Stack. This is something which every telecommunication student at university goes and learns and has to learn by heart. And it effectively divides the transmission of communication and services into several layers, and because they're all stacked up on each other, it's called a stack. There are two models out there. The OSI model, which you see on the right-hand side, is the more elaborate one, if you want. And it starts, if you start reading it from the bottom, you've got the physical layer, that's the actual cable that is plugged into the wall, or that could be the actual satellite dish and the stream that goes over to your satellite. There's the data link layer, which is the protocol that is used to send information on that cable. That's not internet, it's just a protocol to make sure that you plug a box at one end and you plug a box at the other, and the two boxes will be able to speak to each other. Then above that, you've got the network layer and the transport layer, and these ones are ones which are on the TCP/IP side, the internet layer and the transport layer. And when we go to the next slide, you'll see what actually comes out of this. And above that, you've got the session layer, the presentation layer, and the application layer, and these ones are actually related to your laptop. And this is the work that starts taking place on the device you hold in your hand. So the next diagram is this one, and that's the one which makes it a little bit maybe more clear. The transport and the network layer are, well, transport is Transport Control Protocol, which you might have heard of a little bit earlier today, and the network part is Internet Protocol. So TCP and IP, the TCP/IP protocol that you use to transfer data across the internet, what the internet is based on is actually above the data link and the physical layer, which is how you plug into things. And above that, you've got the actual applications. So HTTP, FTP, email, telnet. HTTP is your web. FTP, SMTP, all of that, these are just the applications that run on the internet. So if you actually look at how things are, telecommunications really is the bottom two layers. It's the physical and the data link layer. So if you replace the term telecommunications with the term ICTs, well, then effectively you're expanding what you're looking at and what you're going to apply your regulations to. You are expanding it to the IP network, including any private network that is out there. And really, what is the internet but a gigantic virtual, maybe not so private network, but it's a gigantic virtual network. And then, of course, you're expanding your regulations to the content and to the applications that run on the internet. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why it's such a big deal. Because at that point, it really changes the remit of the ITU from dealing with the telecommunication part of things to dealing with the content and bringing governments into the picture for this. So, why is the WCIT so controversial? Well, there's also a proposed new per-usage billing. So effectively, a company like Google that provides a lot of information to the rest of the internet would have to pay on a per amount of traffic that they send out. It's a clever idea because you think, well, if you're a country that is based very far with low connectivity in Africa, let's say, and you have to connect to the internet, it's going to cost a lot more than if you're based in Western European or any European country actually, which already has good local infrastructure where you can connect to a local exchange point, something that is easy to connect to. So of course you think, well, it's going to be very unfair for people in Africa to get connected to the internet. They have to pay more. So it would be fairer if Google would pay part of that amount because they're sending the traffic over to Africa. The problem is that the Google model works on advertising. So Google can, it's their right to do so, Google can do a profit and loss on every country that they serve. And they can say, well, we generate X amount of money from country X and Y amount from country Y. But if they don't generate any advertising or they don't have any operations that they need to support, if it's not a strategic location for them, but they would have to pay to send information to that country, it is their right to just stop serving that country. And so you end up with the internet, instead of expanding, of reducing itself in size. But the first ones who are going to be affected are not the actual people that live outside that country. The first people who will be affected are the people in the country itself, because Google will stop serving Gmail and YouTube and all of the great services which we have grown accustomed to. And I took Google as an example. You could say the same thing of Facebook. You could say the same thing of Yahoo, of any of the other information suppliers out there. And so those countries that would support the new per-usage billing are those who stand to lose the most at the end. Filtering and control of information. Well, we've heard with Leonid Todorov that this is something that's on vogue in some countries. In fact, many countries like this sort of idea, even many Western countries. In the UK, they have come up with ideas for filtering. Of course, it's always a case of, it would be great if we could filter all the traffic. But we need to buy the equipment to do so. Let's get the ISPs, the internet service providers, to pay for the equipment. And you can check, the internet service providers are not going to bill their customers and say, just for the privilege of us filtering your traffic, pay us more. No, that just doesn't work. So there was a lot of pushback on this idea, and that, for the time being, is not flying simply because nobody wants to pay for the equipment. And we all have to hope that the equipment doesn't come down in cost, because at that point we might be in trouble. Licensing. Now this is an interesting one. Licensing of web content. Because we all know when we look at the web, and you have some great websites that look professional and so on, and you go on them and you read the information and you're doing research for a report that is really important, but you don't really know if the information is valid or not. I mean, you're not quite sure what the sources are. There's always a saying, you have to check more than one source of information on the internet, because none of it is verified. So why don't we just license websites? Websites with a license, the information is right, it's correct, it's perfect. Websites without a license, we can cut them off, and then we'll have a really good, civilized internet with great, proper information. We know that it's right, we know there's not going to be any disinformation going on. Excellent idea. Yeah, the only problem is, who does the licensing? I mean, is it the government at that moment that then looks at the information and says, and then any one of you, and I think it's something that goes worldwide, not only in France or Germany or Bulgaria or the US, everywhere in the world, administrations are notoriously slow, especially any administration that deals with licensing of anything. It could be just one paper that they need to stamp, and no, they have to make you wait 4 hours because, it's an important thing. And so licensing is just one of these things that would make the internet absolute hell. And that, of course, would go directly against what was said earlier about the human rights and freedom of speech and this sort of thing. I mean, imagine, you say anything, you have to get it licensed before you can put it out there. Then, of course, the fact that the ITU is all governments, they're not called governments, actually, they're called administrations. That's the correct term, administrations. So control of the ICTs, of the internet, would go to administrations. And if we had control of the internet in administration's hands or in government's hands at the beginning, well, we wouldn't have an internet. The very fact that the internet was started by many different individuals, and Vint Cerf spoke about the early days of what they were doing on this DARPA project, and all of the work that was funded by the US government. And some of it, he basically mentioned, well, one of the things is the government didn't really quite know what we were doing. They just gave us this chunk of money, and then we just did a lot more than we were supposed to do. But we just thought we would build it, and it was so exciting that we actually went further than how we thought it would go. And the way that it became commercialized was a little strange, and Wolfgang mentioned it, but one of the things is, because there were several government contractors on there, those government contractors that were on the internet started using it not only to connect to that actual project that they were working on, but to talk to each other and to do business on it. And so that's how the net grew basically against, it wasn't a proactive thing, it was against the government's wishes to start with. Because they never designed a network from scratch. US Department of Defense, let's build a network for the world. Yeah, how are you going to tell the US taxpayer about this one? Notoriously, yes. No, not happening. So you have this problem of control of the ICT going to governments, and then you have the regulation which uses multilateralism rather than multi-stakeholderism. And I'm not even sure. Yes, well, this is another problem. Multilateralism in French is multilatéral. Well, that translates well. I'm not sure how it translates in Romanian or in. Can you translate it easily?
multilateral.
Oh, goodness, well, that's terrible. It's so much easier to go for multilateralism than forget about this multi-stakeholderism thing. So that's one of the things. It's just so much more complicated, this internet thing, with so many more people. And this is why the controversy is there, because for some people, multi-stakeholderism is the answer. And for others, it's multilateralism. The more conservative would basically follow something that is easy to understand and more structured, and the more I guess less conservative of us would go for this multi-stakeholderism business. How do members take part in this WCIT? And this is an interesting one, because how do members take part in an IGF? You just turn up. How do people take part in ICANN? No, you just turn up as well. That's that's a bit strange. But here, no, here it's just governments and sector members. They call sector members, primarily telecommunication companies. And so, if you want to take part and are not part of a government or part of a sector member, then there is no chance of you to take part at all. However, with the WCIT process, several countries have introduced consultation processes in their own country, and some have actually done better than others. Some governments have arranged for a multi-stakeholder working group. In the UK, that's what they have done, and that's how I have ended up on the English delegation. And I think it was very laudable of them to start many months ago and foresee that they would require more input from businesses, from civil society, from internet users, from the technical community, because the knowledge that was in the government and in the government department dealing specifically with ITU issues was not vast enough to be able to answer all the questions that were being asked. Some countries have decided that they know better, and so they have kept the work in telecom and government hands. And this is a problem, but there's no way to tell them otherwise. I guess the blind lead the blind. And when you have been working in the field of telecommunications for the past 40 years and are now being told that you need to speak to other people and you're not the expert in your field, it's a hard thing to take. So some countries have just gone on by themselves. Some administrations have made proposals. It's not the ITU that makes proposals, it's ITU members. So it's the member countries, the member administrations, the member sectors, sector members that will send proposals, and they will send them by region. So some proposals are very well known. The United States have published several proposals, which basically says we don't want any of this stuff. Russia has sent quite a few proposals as well, which say exactly the opposite of what the US is saying, which is, it's good, at least you have a model, you can write the opposite and you follow the right path. There are several other countries that have broad proposals, and now really what's going to happen in Dubai is that all of these proposals, article by article, are going to be looked at, studied, and discussed. And hopefully there will be a consensus on where to go for each one of these proposals. There is a problem though, because many of these proposals, the views are so opposite to each other. How are you going to find consensus? Article 2, telecommunications versus ICTs. Well, this is a red line issue for many countries. So if one says yes and one says no, how do you go about finding consensus? There's no gray line. You can't just have a treaty saying maybe. That would just not work out. So it would be really interesting to see how the discussions take place. It's 14 days. 10 days, 10, 11 days of discussions. And I hear, I've never done this myself, but I hear that some of the meetings can take place until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I look forward to ordering some pizza around that time, and I hope that we'll also be able to order some alcoholic drinks, which might help with the negotiating at some point. Attendance is actually really high. There's, at the moment, as of yesterday, over 1,000 people coming. And the delegations, the larger delegation is United Arab Emirates. The second one is the United States. So they are bringing in a multi-stakeholder delegation. They've got people from companies and users, civil society, huge delegation there. The third one is Nigeria. That got quite a few people to raise their eyebrows and think, well, that's interesting because they haven't really been very much involved with a lot of the early discussions, but no doubt they have formulated an opinion with their African neighbors. Brazil, Russian Federation, also very large contingency. Canada as well, UK. If you go down the list, China is not in there yet. They have not said yet how many people they will send, and they will probably let everyone know shortly. I expect it to be quite a large delegation because China has been behind some of the more restrictive propositions that have been published. So, and they yield considerable influence with many countries because you are looking at geopolitics in action here. You know, who are our friends? Who are going to support our recommendations? The recommendations don't matter. It's the friendship, you know. Oh, we need to know we have support from X number of countries. And you wonder, well, why so many people? The first thing is because there's going to be a lot of negotiating, and it probably will take place in side sessions, in little workshops, late at night, and so on. And it's probably pretty hard for a small number of people to follow absolutely everything that is going on. So being able to share the workload is going to be important. But the other thing is you probably want to be present in all the discussions and not miss on anything. So you need to have enough eyes, enough ears, enough people on the ground to be able to talk at local level and find out what's going on. Bulgaria, unfortunately, and I've added it at the bottom, there's a long list of more countries. Bulgaria is unfortunately sending only 4 people to Dubai. So I'm not sure, I don't know if any knows who they are, but it's not many people.
No, they're sending more.
They're sending more?
This is not the final list.
Oh no, it's great. Oh, excellent. So we'll have more than 1,000 people. I better book my hotel room very quickly if I want to have one. Okay, possible outcomes. Now this is interesting. Of course, there's going to be a lot of discussion, fundamental discussions of multilateralism versus multi-stakeholderism. It's a little bit like talking about religion, isn't it, at that point? There's going to be some geopolitics, as I mentioned, and of course, one hopes that a deal will be reached. But it looks increasingly impossible to reach an actual overall deal on everything. So there might be a partial deal. Some of the articles might be agreed on, some of them might be pushed for further study, which is the diplomatic term for failing to reach agreement. If there is no deal at all on these things, on the ITRs, then there might be a vote. And this is an interesting thing. The vote is really a last last thing of last resort, and say, well, we need to count how many friends we have. And this is why everyone is looking at their friends and trying to find out how many other countries are going to vote with them, which way they will vote, etc. So there's a lot of mathematics going on in calculation as to what is the position of such and such a country and whether they've changed position and so on. And so the vote might, well, looking at the numbers, it looks as though due to the number of countries around the world, that a vote might actually agree to the ITRs. But it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, because once the ITRs are actually are actually voted at the ITU, each member country has to ratify them into local law. And of course, a country like the United States or like the UK, who have been very open about the fact they do not wish to have the ITRs as they are currently drafted, would then not ratify them in their national law. And so you would end up with something a little strange, because you would get, well, maybe partial ratification. I mean, there are discussions about GSM billing, GSM mobile phone roaming agreements. And that's something which I think everyone wants. Bring down the cost of mobile phone roaming, because in some countries you're billed several, I don't know, $2–3 a minute. And even more, mobile phone data billing. That's one of these really crazy ones. You forget to turn off your mobile data and you come back home to a huge bill. I see a few people nodding. It's happened to all of us. So some of these ITRs will be ratified. Some of them will not at all. And so what will happen to the internet? It's a big question. It might split into more than one internet. You might have the internet of those countries ratifying the ITRs and the internet of those countries not ratifying the ITRs. You might have the thing that Google or large information providers might stop sending information to some countries. It really is a step into the big unknown. One thing is sure, the only thing that is sure in there is that the negotiations will continue. The WCIT is not the end of the negotiating, and it might well be actually the first, the start of the negotiating. These are issues which have been going around for a very, very long time. Ever since the early 90s, a lot of telecommunication companies have asked and said, hang on, we have these companies that are starting up with 5 people in Silicon Valley, and within 2 years they're worth several $billions. We have been in existence for 60 years. We have millions of customers, and we're only worth 300 million. What's that all about? And so there's been a lot of questioning of the internet model, and when you have a large pie, everyone wants a slice of it. The thing is, so far, nothing was actually discussed on an official level, an official table, and this looks as though this is the first time the world takes a stab at discussing this on a global level. Whichever way it goes, I personally think it's a good idea that there is a discussion about this. Putting things under the carpet until the whole room smells is not a good idea. You need to take things out and put it on the table. I have faith that the outcome will not be as catastrophic as they say, because ultimately what rules the world, as Wolfgang said, was power and money. Power, well, if there are equal powers, then it balances itself out. Money is an important one because it doesn't need to balance itself out, but everybody wants it. And if you are going to sign a treaty that might bring your country down to the Stone Age, maybe not the Stone Age, but the age when there was no internet, which is pretty close to the Stone Age when there was no internet, then you will have your fellow ministers, president, asking you questions and saying, so how good is that for our economy? And if it translates into a negative figure, at that point you might see, and I have faith that you might see some of those positions change. Perhaps not at WCIT there and then, but in the future, because as I said, negotiations will absolutely continue. Thank you.